Farm4Profit Podcast. Take a listen, have a blast. Farm4Profit Podcast. Learn about farming while having a laugh. Farm4Profit Podcast.
All right, listeners, we've got a familiar face, a familiar name to not only the Farm4Profit Podcast, but we also have to agriculture. This man is making a definite name for himself in the carbon industry. And that's what we're here to talk a little bit more about, because I don't think anybody has a very clear understanding. And I say anybody as in our listeners, people that are around consuming this data to help make their farmers more profitable.
He's a cover boy.
He's a cover boy.
I got a magazine, ag magazine, in my mailbox, and I open up. Oh, look at this! Look at this! I think that was like Wallace's Farmer.
Wallace Farmer here the other day, yeah. But I thought it was funny because we've been talking a lot about carbon intensity, and the whole article is about corn. Yeah. And it's me holding on the soybean plant. But that was great. Gil had interviewed a while back, and he's a new editor there at Wallace's Farmer. But fun little surprise to have guys Snapchatting me like, geez, can't even look at the mail anymore.
Right.
Like, what the heck?
Right.
Just ruin everything.
Well, you were talking to Rachel. Rachel had to go several states away to see you, and you guys are miles apart, correct?
Yeah, down in Washington, Iowa is where I'm out of. And, farm down there, and then the Continuum Ag stuff down there based in Washington, Iowa.
Yeah, so we should probably properly reintroduce you. So this is Mitchell Hora, your 7th generation Iowa farmer, founder and CEO of Continuum Ag. You are farming in a very important time frame that you're trying to help a lot of people understand the carbon market. You, on your farm, have adopted the innovative technologies of diverse cover crops, interseeding covers, relay cropping some, small grains, and other soil health practices.
Yeah, we've been doing all these practices on our farm. My family actually started using no-till back in the 70s. We've been cover cropping now since 2013. But this whole carbon thing, right? We're at Commodity Classic today. Everyone and their dog is talking about these carbon programs, sustainability programs. Everyone has got one, and farmers are like, what the heck do I actually do? And what has been frustrated to me of it is most of these programs are privatized cost share, paying farmers to do new practices like add cover crop or reduce tillage. You're not necessarily paying people based on their actual carbon footprint. But about almost a year and a half ago, I became aware of carbon intensity, which is our ability to actually put a score on our corn or our soybeans, the actual carbon footprint of our crop. So now farms like mine and so many farmers out there that have been doing practice for a long time, now we can actually tell our story to say, here is the carbon intensity of our corn or soybeans that follows that crop into the marketplace. And that's where we've been really pushing with Continuum Ag, telling that story, making sure that farmers know that their data is worth huge, huge money. And, potentially hundreds of dollars an acre type of money.
Does this excite you?
Well, what I've heard, on the surface, I can't remember what the bill or what the tax or what
it's called 45Z.
45Z. I'm like, what is that? And some ethanol, biofuels, whatever thing. I'm like, whatever. It's just another one of them things. But then you start looking into the article and you start seeing what it could potentially bring to your farm's bottom line. We're talking a big time, like way more than we ever would think.
Yeah.
So
and it's based on your actual score. And it's your score versus the default score, which is on a county-by-county basis. It's from the Department of Energy. The GREET model is how they score it. But, the further you want to decrease your carbon footprint, the more money that you could earn, because the lower the carbon footprint of our corn, the lower the carbon footprint of the ethanol.
So Dave has said for years that data is the currency of the internet. And you're saying that data is the currency of the carbon market.
Yeah, all of this stuff, if we want to tell our story, it takes data. And it takes we got to back that up. We got to substantiate our claims, especially if we're looking at wanting to demand prices like $100 an acre or more. You better have your T's crossed and I's dotted, but also this is a federal tax credit. So it's reporting data to the IRS. So if we're lying or get caught in an audit, it's literally called fraud. Definition of fraud. So we have got to have the data here, and that's what we're doing at Continuum Ag, helping farmers get that organized.
So when you started Continuum Ag, this wasn't a thing.
Not even close.
But
yeah.
now it feels like, well, at least that's what we see in the media. It feels like that's all you're doing.
That's all we're doing. Yeah, I literally switched the company on its head. Even since I was last hung out with you guys just months ago, that we used to do soil sampling, crop consulting, and then maybe some helping with data. Now it's we got to have our data put together. Number one, you got to have your CI score. Then if you want some agronomic help, we can help you with that. Then if you want some soil sampling, okay, that's an add-on later. But yeah, man, we are all in on this carbon intensity thing. I think it's by far the biggest thing in ag, and hardly anybody's talking about it.
Were you just looking it up the last time that we talked with Mitchell?
October 18th of 2022.
Oh, so we're a year and a half.
Because
Okay,
it was
wow.
Boone
Yeah,
Farm
yeah.
Progress, and it was in Decatur last year. So,
Okay, yeah, Farm Progress. Yeah, so we so this tax credit, the Inflation Reduction Act, came out in August of 2022. So in October, I would have just been starting to look at it, just starting to figure out, okay, is there something there? But then, yeah, we have just gone whole hog since that time, and we really started launching our stuff in the summer of 2023, and now we've ramped up the team, ramped up the amount of acres that we're impacting. And
What
the
does
awareness.
Continuum Ag's tie? If it's a federal tax credit, then we work with the federal government to get the tax. How does your company get in the middle here?
So it's actually the ethanol companies or the biofuel manufacturers. So
Okay.
it's ethanol, biodiesel, sustainable aviation fuel, renewable diesel. Those guys get the tax credit. So they tell the IRS what their carbon intensity score was, and they get a tax credit based on how low their score is. In order to lower their score, they can buy low carbon corn and soybeans. Low carbon footprint corn and soybeans goes into producing low carbon fuel. But they need our data to do that. So Continuum Ag charges farmers $5 an acre, and we help you to document the practices, get field level CI scores, and get it verified. It's kind of like an organic system. Organic farmers got to document everything, get it third party verified, then they can sell it at a premium. Same thing here, but it's not organic yay or nay. It's what's your actual score, which is impacted by your fertilizer, your fuel usage, your pesticides. Did you use cover crops? What was your tillage? What was your yield? It's all these things, and basically rewards efficiency, and farmers get paid a premium. The biofuel manufacturers go and create the credit, but Continuum Ag is the one that's helping the farmers to get their scores put together so that the biofuel companies know that what they're buying is legit.
So are you measuring anything, or is it just, if you're no-till, this is how much that's worth?
Practices only, but it's everything, right? So it's what's your tillage, cover crop, fertilizer. It's basically every pass across the field divided by the yield that came off that field.
So who's double checking it to make
who's
sure it's
coming out?
right?
We work
Like-
with a third-party verifier. They're out of West Des Moines. We work with multiple CPA firms that have signed off on this. It has got to be T's crossed, I's dotted.
But is it like drones? I mean, who's the drone police that are going to come and get us? Who's the carbon intensity police that say that I'm sorry, you didn't have a 29, you had a 27?
That's right.
I mean, who are they?
Yeah, so it'll end up being audits, likely from the IRS auditing the ethanol manufacturers, and they are going to need to show their data, but they will also have gone through a third-party verification. So there's companies like Eco Engineers, SES, there's a variety of these third-party verifiers that do that. They could send out the drone, they could look at satellite imagery, they could send a representative out to the farm to check the data and do some on-site visits. But what we're trying to do is beat them to the punch of here's the shape files, here's the receipts, here is the maps, here's the scouting, images. to
When I
show
think of
them.
tax credit, I think of you got to make enough money to write off the tax credit. So if I'm a small time farmer and I don't make enough, I lose money
Tax
every year.
credits to the ethanol plant,
Yeah, tax credit to the ethanol plant, not to the farmer.
not to the farmer.
So the ethanol plant's just going to pay me, so they get the write off.
They get the tax credit. So how it works is they get the tax credit. They can directly offset dollar for dollar the taxes that they would need to pay.
Okay.
Whatever they have left over, or if they're a co-op, right, a farmer-owned co-op, you don't pass these along in the K1s. You would resell these tax credits on the open market. That's also a very new concept. But these credits can be sold for cash on the open market. For right now, they're going 92 to 96 cents on the dollar. So I create $1 worth of tax credit. If I don't need it, I can sell it to, call it Goldman Sachs or some of these
$1,
companies that are
$2,
Taylor
negative
Swift.
$1,
Taylor
$3,
Swift.
You could,
buy
you
the
could
tax
auction
credits.
carbon.
We should.
That's a good idea. You can make some money.
He can come be part of the package. So you guys are solving a problem for all that data? Because it's a lot to handle.
It's a lot to handle. It's all the data in 18 different spots, right? The common thing that we talk about in ag, right? All of our data is all over the place. So we're just another one trying to get it all pulled together, but with the uniqueness of running that carbon intensity score of that data and getting it verified.
So why the billion bushel challenge?
Yeah, so 6 billion bushels of corn go into ethanol every year, or thereabouts. Okay, it's about 16 billion gallons of ethanol produced in this country every year. Nearly 44% of the U.S. corn crop. So that's also why they did the tax credits for biofuel, right? It's not a cattle tax credit. It's not a pork tax credit. It's a biofuel tax credit because it's volume, but it's also heavy polluting industries, right? Fuel, energy, all that. But so we're trying to help get volume built up. In order for these companies to really optimize these credits, they have to have a volume of low carbon bushels, and we want to get the first billion bushels organized. We're at about 100 million bushels today.
Well, that sounds like a lot, and also you're a long ways away at the same time.
Long way away. Yeah, but we have got to keep ramping up big time. But I mean, yeah, basically between now and harvest, farmers need to be getting their data put together and evaluate, could you tap into some of this money?
So what is that worth? If you look at this on a per acre, or obviously per bushel is a little bit more difficult, or maybe it isn't.
No, it's actually easier.
Okay, so what is it worth to the farmer?
Yep, so how it works is every county has a default number. Most of them are around 29.
Is that because of county yield?
It's part of county yield, but it's the number comes from the Department of Energy.
Oh.
They developed the model called the GREET model. It was actually developed in first released in the 90s. And as we sit here today, they're going to be releasing a brand new GREET model tomorrow, March 1. Okay? So March 1, a brand new GREET model comes out, and it's going to have new county baseline numbers. But the farmer can quantify their own score instead of using that default number. And on my farm, my score was negative 4.1. I'm no-till, cover cropping, about 155 units of nitrogen. Last year did 212 bushel corn. And the delta between a score of 29 and a score of my negative 4, every point that's reduced is worth anywhere from 5.4 to 6 cents per bushel. So call it 5.4 cents per bushel per point reduced, which that range is because 1 bushel of corn creates anywhere from 2.7 to 3 gallons of ethanol. And it's the ethanol company that gets the tax credit. So it's based on their efficiencies, influences the farmer side. But on my farm, it'd be worth about $1.92 a bushel. $1.92 a bushel on 212 bushel corn. That's $406 an acre.
Holy
Now that's
smokes.
the total value of the tax credit,
right?
To share between the biofuel manufacturer, the farmer, the MMRV companies and stuff, like the verifiers and all that. But we're talking real money here, boys. Like the average farmer that we found today has a score of 9.4. So even that deduction and having a score of 9 is worth about $1.20.
So why do we go negative? This, I was reading the article and I just blows my mind. Why don't we make it simple, like 1 to 100, and not 29.6 and then negative 4?
Yeah.
It makes no sense. Who made this?
Well, that's the Department of Energy tool. So the units on that is that that number is in terms of grams of CO2 equivalents per megajoule of energy or per bushel. So it's grams
per
of CO2
megajoule.
This is why I went to college.
Yeah. So no, they didn't teach none of this at Iowa State, right? So very new stuff. But so here's how it works. So in all these carbon credit things, we've been talking about tons of CO2,
yeah.
right? Carbon credits, 1 CO2 equivalent. This is now in terms of per bushel. And then the bushel gets converted to the megajoule so that it can be consistent across any different fuel, because again, it's a Department of Energy unit of measure.
So if it's how much he created, okay, so it's his yield and his practices and what fertilizer he put on, and I decide to sell his farm, how do I write on the sale bill that the CI score for this farm is X to the potential guy that's going to buy it?
So it actually won't work exactly like that because it's on every bushel every year. Every year, in every field and every year, the score is going to be different because it's based on that yield for that field, the fertilizer, the fuel usage, what was the tillage, did it have manure, what were the practices on that field. And so then what you do is you've got 15 different fields, right? And each of those 15 fields has its own score and has an amount of bushels that came off. And we get that verified. Then when you aggregate your bushels at your grain site, now you run a weighted average CI score of all the different bushels and all the CI scores that went into your grain site. Then every time you pull from that grain site, that CI score goes on the scale ticket and then goes into their equation. So at the elevator, they would aggregate bushels just like we can.
When does Continuum Ag start selling seed that is a higher CI score than other seeds so that people plant that versus worrying about the corn? We're worrying about how much money we make off of carbon, not worried about how much money we make off the actual commodity.
Yeah, so I mean the commodity or the carbon value of this is huge, right? I mean it could influence the value of the crop by 5, 10, 15, 20, maybe 20%. I mean, so it's not like an organic premium, but we're talking real money here. So, but no, it won't necessarily be low carbon seed. There could be some of that, but more so the best way to lower your score is plant a cover crop, reduce tillage, utilize manure instead of as much synthetic fertilizer, lower your synthetic fertilizer.
And raise more bushels.
And raise more bushels, right? So think of it as what's your inputs divided by your yield. It's about efficiency.
That's why it has to be able to go negative, because if you're David Hula and you grow 600 bushel corn and you got all this stuff, you can't just stop at 0.
Yeah.
Otherwise, he's penalized.
And it doesn't make any sense to make 50 the midfield line and everything underneath 50 is...
Well, but the number is, so 29 grams of CO2 per megajoule. That means they're losing 29 grams of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere when they're producing that corn. So 0 would mean we're carbon neutral. So my farm of -4 means I'm sequestering a little bit more carbon than what I'm putting and losing into the atmosphere. Okay, so the further negative you are, the more carbon you're getting and keeping in your system versus what you're losing based on your fertilizer and fuel
What
usage.
share is the co-op going to take of this if they want? They're not going to give me 100% of the money that they get.
Or, well, it's going to be the ethanol plant.
Yeah, that's
I do have that question written down here of what if you don't have an ethanol plant? A lot of times you'll sell into a co-op that does sell to an ethanol plant or something, put it on a rail or whatever.
So what we're working on is that whoever's delivering that grain, they should get probably around 50% of the value. So 50, maybe probably between a third to 50% of the value going to that the seller of that corn, whether that be the farmer selling direct or the elevator selling it, and then that elevator can pass along that money to the farmer. So how it'll work is the farmer produces the corn, it has a CI score, the elevator buys that corn and buys that data, right? We helped with that transaction. Then they aggregate all the bushels of all the farmers they buy, and how it works is you either have a score or you have to use the county default, which is that 29 number, which sucks. So you want to have anything better than 29 is better than having to use the default number. Again, Vilsack is coming tomorrow. They're going to announce a new GREET model that gets released tomorrow. So that number will change. But the thing is, you're either the default or you prove that you're otherwise.
If you defaulted and you had 212 bushel corn, what would the value be?
Not good. Probably like all the default practices, but 212 bushel corn, we're talking a score way up there close to 29 and maybe a couple cents a bushel at the best just for having the data, right? But basically it ends up being any reduction, every point that you reduce your score from 29 is worth as much as 6 cents per point reduced per bushel. And then the farmer gets a cut out of that, the ethanol company gets cut, and the elevator gets cut, and so on.
So is the ethanol, how are they going to pay that? Is it going to come in the form of a basis or a different payment? Or
No, I think it'll be a premium on top, right? So on the scale ticket, right, you'll have the price, and then you have some dockages, and you got check off and all that kind of stuff that comes out of that total amount, and then this would be a premium on top of that, all right? Just like a non-GMO premium or an organic premium, it's the price, and then here's a premium on top.
So I like how you talked about the weighted average CI scores. You put this all in the bin. If I am a feedlot and I do feed some of my corn to my cattle and I deliver the rest to the ethanol plant, it's all intermingled. That kernel of corn you're not going to know came from my farm A versus Martha's. Can I still, though, take the weighted average on my best performing CI score farms as long as the bushels match up?
So that's part of what we don't know the exact details yet, okay? So how I believe it's going to work is each of those fields will have a score, and if you aggregate them all together, now they're all blended. You don't know which one was which, and every bushel has a score. You're really only going to be able to monetize it if you're selling to the ethanol plant, though.
Yep.
The corn that you're using to feed pigs, like my corn, right? Washington County, Iowa.
Yep.
A lot of pigs. My corn goes to feed pigs today. But if my corn is worth significantly more to go to the ethanol plant,
they got to start bidding for it.
We got to go. And but what this is going to force and why I'm so bullish on this, the pork industry has goals of lowering their carbon footprint too. Today, 65% of the carbon footprint of pork comes from the feed, the grain.
Oh, really?
65%, isn't that crazy? For pork, it's 65%. For beef cow, it's about 55%. For dairy, it's about 40% of the carbon footprint of that animal comes from the grain. So,
is there any way that we can make our own co-op as farmers? And you said that co-ops might sell to the ethanol plants as well. So could we all get together and start our own coalition of carbon credits and basically say, hey, ethanol, tell you what, here's the minimum
billion bushel challenge?
Yeah, the minimum we're going to sell. Yeah.
So we need to be binding together, saying, hey, if I just go to the ethanol plant and say, hey, I got
X,
100,000 bushels, they're going to say we buy 40 million bushels. Sorry, you don't really move the needle. But we got to be able to get more farmers aware of what's their score. That's the whole point of the billion bushel challenge. What's your score? Everyone needs to know what their score is. We're actually here running CI scores for free while we're here too.
Gotcha.
And but farmers can go on. Our software is called Topsoil. Topsoil.ag is our software. It's an online system. And that's where you can get your score and show you what it is. But yeah, we got to work together as a group here because the typical ethanol plant buys 30 to 40 million bushels of corn, and 1 million bushels of low carbon corn doesn't move the weighted average enough to really make it worth it. We got to have significant participation, and that's from just trying to spread the word as much as we can spread it.
You said every county is different, so we got farmers from everywhere listening right now. When I think of scoring, I think of Iowa, CSR score. We're all from Iowa. What about Montana? What about New York? What about other places? Is the CI score going to be constant across all counties? It varies, but you're talking about a GREET score, and they're going to change it already. Can they just change it whenever they want? So first question, is it the same? And second question, can they change it whenever they want?
Yeah, so every county is different, okay? And it's based on climate and soils and stuff like that, right? Your footprint would be different in every county. It makes sense.
Okay.
But it's kind of funky, right? This is the Department of Energy that's got this thing, right? Not necessarily the ag guys. And it's definitely not perfect, but it's the gold standard today. It's a government tax credit using a government calculator, okay? But they're going to continue to update it and make it more robust, make it more accurate, and try to get it as good as we can for each of those counties. But I don't know that there's a public source of what are each of the county baseline scores. And again, they're releasing this new model tomorrow, March 1. But happy to show farmers what the baseline score is. But
so naturally, you
going to continue to,
if you're in Montana or rangeland, you're not taking that to
ethanol,
fuel.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not going to.
So
really
this
matter.
model today is mostly Midwest.
Yeah,
it's Midwest. It's the big corn-producing states are where the most.
But we produce corn in Texas where we're at now.
Oh,
but
yeah.
I got to assume the I states are probably going to get a higher score or a better score, be lower in this case, score than someone like.
Not necessarily higher or lower, but it's just more nuanced, more honed in the Midwest. This was developed. The model was developed out of it's the Argonne National Lab out of the Chicago area. It's a Department of Energy lab, but they worked a lot with the University of Illinois. So it's a lot of Midwest folks that developed this model.
So we had child tax credit, and then the administration changed, and all of a sudden we got a new president, and all of a sudden we don't have it, and now it's even more. Is this something that it's going to get voted on every 4 years? Is it in the ag bill? Where is it?
This was part of the Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay.
And the 45Z is due to start on January 1, 2025.
Okay.
For fuel produced in 25, right? Fuel produced in 25. Produce the crop that we're going to grow this year. But this currently is in place until 2027. Now, it is a tax credit. Stroke of a pen, it could be gone, but say Trump gets elected, it's got good bipartisan support already. It sounds like this one's pretty darn stable from what my sources are telling me in D.C., but, that's the risk, right? Tax credits could come and go, but good chance that it gets extended beyond 2027 as well.
But here's the best part about it, right? We aren't asking the farmer to change their practices to do this. It's not the rule of additionality for you to qualify. We're simply quantifying the score for your acres. So it's in Mitchell's example,
so
it's a $5 per acre.
Make it clear, this isn't carbon sequestration. This is carbon tax credit.
Yep.
But what you sequestered versus what you emitted is basically what goes into the score. But yeah, because it's a tax credit, and because it's carbon intensity, it's not an offset where it's being sold as a credit, subject to the registries and additionality and permanence and all these definitions that make it tough in agriculture. This is just what's the footprint of your bushel. When you sell that data and sell that bushel, it's done. And now the next person owns it.
Can you still participate in programs like Tuterra or anything like that?
It doesn't look like it.
Really?
Now, we don't know for 100% certainty on that, but I really worry about it. I think it's a big risk. I worry that we're double counting the carbon. I don't know that anyone would get in trouble from the government side of things, but I think where we run into issues is the registries and the buyers of this tax credit.
Yeah.
And in those contracts, in these carbon credit contracts, there's clauses in there about not participating in other outcome-based programs or not participating in other carbon programs, and this definitely is one. Now, it's not a carbon offset program, but it's definitely another outcome-based type of thing.
I wonder if it'll ever work like crop insurance, like PLC or Arc County. That's what this sounds like. But then we can have supplemental crop insurance on top of it.
I don't need any more acronyms in my life.
No. But it is interesting, as we've had conversations with Tuterra about they've got a program that provides financial support to upgrade the equipment that you did to make a change in practice. Probably something like that would be an all right thing to double dip, because you aren't. That's an incentive for you to change your practice, which potentially lowers your CI score.
You got it. So you can do cost share, or you can do other programs that pay for the practice. You just can't have two different companies try to claim the carbon.
The same value of the carbon.
You got it.
Which is interesting. Back to Dave's point of, could this go away? It could go away, but ultimately, once you are enrolled in a program like yours and you have your CI score, if it's not available in 2028, then you just don't get the premium at the ethanol plant.
Yeah, I mean, so that's the risk, right? Is we're charging farmers up front for the farmer to own the data, right? And there's plenty of other companies that are helping farmers get CI scores, but in those, the farmer doesn't necessarily have all the visibility and they don't necessarily own the data, right? So that's the trade-off. Do you want to own it? Do you want to have the independence? Or do you want to be tied to a group?
So what do you recommend for all the early implementers that are already signed up with a carbon program?
Yeah, know what your score is. It doesn't hurt to at least know what your score is today. You can go to Topsoil. It is $500 if you go in there, or you can chat with some of our folks. Might be able to show you what it is. If you talk to the right person, might be able to get it at a pretty steep discount. If you know what I'm saying.
It's 4 o'clock on a Friday, and you show up with
we can tell you what your score is.
And you're at Commodity Classic.
We can tell you what your score is, but. Number one is farmers, this is a business decision, right? We're selling two different kind of things here. We've got our crop and we've got this data and our story. Just know what your data is worth. I think that's the biggest thing. Everyone and their dog has carbon programs. All these companies want your data. What makes me so excited about this is an opportunity for farmers to tell our actual story. And with a precedent being set now, it is government interference, absolutely, and it's not perfect, but the dollar value that it's setting is so much better than anything else that's out there. It could be potentially better than anything else that's out there.
Is there
I think it's going to force everyone else to change.
Is there a calculator out there like we have Smart Decision Maker at Iowa State University? Do we have Smart Carbon Decision Maker that basically says, hey, if I put cover crops, that will lower me from a this to a that, and that means this many more cents on the dollar
per bushel?
That's what we do
in our software, yep.
So in our software,
Topsoil, yep, you plug in your current practices, we show you your current score, then you can run scenarios and recalculate to see what the score would be.
Because you were just talking decision making, and that's what we're all here for, is what's the best decision. So we need a product that's going to help us make that decision faster, better, quicker, to make more money.
But keep in mind, that's where my company started, right? I'm an agronomist. We were a soil sampling company and did consulting. We just happen to have some software. Now we start with, here's the software, here's your numbers, here's the data. Then if you want help with improving, we can help you do that too.
Is there a cap on amount of money that can be paid out, or tax credits that can be paid out, or acres, or anything? You said 1 million bushels.
They haven't set that amount yet.
Challenge, but eventually there could be?
Yeah, eventually there could be. So they do set caps on these credits, but it's renewed annually. And, the maximum amount of these credits I see, if best case scenario with sustainable aviation fuel and everything, we're talking like $50 billion a year. Maximum value of these tax credits. So, that's a lot of money. But when you look at what we're doing with Farm Bill and some of these other things, like it's not that crazy. Plus how these credits work, it's going to take a long time to get there. I mean, if there's a couple billion worth of these credits in the early years, I think that's going to be a lot.
Is this tied to carbon pipelines out of ethanol plants?
Yeah, good question. So the typical ethanol plant today, they could lower their carbon intensity score with a pipeline, that lowers your CI by about 30 points. It takes it pretty much in half. It's a huge change. But the other piece of lowering your carbon intensity is the farmer. We're basically half the footprint as well. So you can do either one, or you can do both. And that's really, it's, hey, if there's lots of solutions out there, but if you have a pipeline, that only cuts your score about in half. The farmers are the other half. But those pipelines aren't going in the ground today or anytime real soon. So the farmers are really the only major lever that we can pull on.
So will every ethanol plant, every biofuel producer participate? Or do they have the option to just turn
They
their
don't
shoulder?
have to. So the ones that wouldn't, I don't know why you wouldn't participate. And a lot of these groups are paying attention. I actually spoke at the National Ethanol Conference in San Diego last week, okay, and was speaking to these ethanol players. They all know about this. And their CEO, he's actually here. I talked to him earlier. But their CEO said, guys, number one thing we could be doing as a biofuel industry is lowering our CI score. Part of that is for these credits, but part of that is for sustainable aviation fuel. Sustainable aviation fuel, by definition, has a 50% or less carbon footprint of regular jet fuel. That's the definition, 50% reduction in carbon intensity. So we've got to get this lowered. But the ethanol companies that wouldn't do it right away are those that have a really crappy CI score to begin with. The ethanol company earns up to 2 cents per CI point that they reduce per gallon of production for every point that they are below 50. So the ethanol company baseline is 50. But if that ethanol score today is 60, 65, they're a long way from getting in the money. But if they're already at 52, 55, they're not that far. Or even if they're at 50 or lower, they're a lot closer to being in the money. They can rock and roll today.
Because for our listeners, just to reiterate the point, right now we can't use American ethanol to make sustainable aviation fuel because our CI score is too high.
Correct.
So we are importing Brazilian ethanol
That's right.
to make sustainable aviation fuel, which is a government-mandated way for us to use more ethanol.
So tomorrow they're announcing that new GREET model for this sustainable aviation fuel thing. So hopefully that problem is solved.
Or gets closer to being
Or
solved.
at least gets closer to being solved. But nonetheless, I talked with a guy from EPA earlier. They're going to be dinging U.S. corn-based ethanol based on this concept of indirect land use change. That's one of the big things that they're going to be talking about in this new GREET model. And that basically hurts us that instead of this being corn, it could be prairie, right? Which would have less of a carbon footprint, which doesn't really make any sense. But that's the concept. In order to combat that, we're going to have more of these low carbon farming practices to be able to lower that score further, to be able to make U.S. ethanol available for sustainable aviation fuel.
Does this make our corn price go up just based on demand? Looking at the carbon pipeline, as I was looking at it, and if it lowers the score for ethanol plants, and then we have more demand for sustainable aviation fuel, well, then they're going to have a higher bid because they're going to need more to make it. Is this also this tax credit? I assume it's going to have the same effect, that it's supply and demand, and if we have more demand, then right now we have a lot of carryover. Well, now maybe we don't have as much carryover because we put more into fuel and get less from Brazil. Does that make our corn price go up?
Maybe, but a lot of these ethanol plants, they can only produce so much ethanol a year, right? So there's a capacity on that ethanol production, like 16 billion gallons a year or thereabouts, okay? So right now in the short term, I don't know that it really influences that. Okay? Now long term, yes. Today, we produce about 16 billion gallons of ethanol every year. Some of the projections I've seen on our demand for sustainable aviation fuel is 22 billion gallons a year.
And the reason
Plus,
I asked
we're going to have ethanol, and you use ethanol for SAF. Like, that long term, absolutely.
The reason I asked that is I have a lot of farmers selling farmland that are against the carbon pipeline and carbon, period. Well, if it's going to help us all make more of a paycheck, it's interesting to me that why are farmers against carbon if carbon can be positive for them in the future? Is it just a monologue that they don't know?
I think it's the biggest thing, and this is what I've told the guys at Summit and at Navigator that's no longer in the game anymore, but these guys, like, they really haven't done a great job of marketing, in my opinion, and I've told them this. They need to be more transparent with how the money actually works. That it is huge money for all of us long term. Now, I'm not necessarily publicly for or against these either, right? I just understand how the math works and how it's going to influence the market opportunity. But with or without a pipeline, the farmer on-farm CI piece is still critically important. But I mean, that pipeline going through would, in theory here, it would really open up a lot of these sustainable aviation fuel markets and other LCFS markets.
Yeah, Corey, let that pipeline come across your property.
If I could play devil's advocate on the farmer side, like say we're 10 years down the road and this is mass adoption, and I'm sure the first few years would be great for the early adopters. We're commodity producers, right? We're working on tight margins, and it's the quickest to the bottom. Everyone's shopping around doing all that stuff. How does that look?
Yeah, I think this is going to influence non-biofuel companies to come to the table. So low carbon pork, low carbon milk, low carbon, all these other things, right? For all these corporate sustainability goals. Instead of buying carbon credits or carbon insets, now we can just do it with a low carbon product, right? So I think some of that creates some more demand and allows us to be able to shop around a little bit more and get a good price. If it's tax credits, we're playing with house money for the most part. I mean, the lower the carbon intensity score of these fuels, the more the tax credit that there is, the more that can be passed along. And these companies are a long way away from being carbon neutral and maximizing these tax credits. So the tax credit maxes out at $1 a gallon, which would be nearly $3 a bushel. And that's if we have everything like fully maxed out, which we are a long way away from. So I think over time, supply and demand changes. And guess what, guys? How many different times have this carbon and sustainability stuff changed just in the last year, let alone the last 5 or 10 years? The goalposts are going to continue to change. This is the hot thing now. It's in this tax credit. It'll change in the future, but
this way maybe seems greener. I'm going to say greener in perception, that rather than I'm Google, I want to be carbon neutral. Hey, we're not going to do anything better to change our carbon. Let's just buy credits to subsidize it. This is, let's buy other practices that actually, or let's invest in other things that are going to change the wound rather than just put a Band-Aid on it.
That's probably why it has bipartisan support.
That's probably why
bipartisan support. That it's, hey, let's actually look internal to our supply chain. It's called your Scope 3 carbon footprint. Okay, so that's your footprint of your supply chain, your indirect impact. So looking internal to the supply chain, that's what's the most sustainable and can drive dollars. But what I love about ag is, like, we actually can be more sustainable. We actually can be low carbon. We actually can improve water quality along the way here too. Like, we're doing a pretty good job by and large, and now we can just tell our story and we can be incentivized to push even further.
I want to challenge that, because Corey's right. We are gamers as farmers. It is. It's such a great way to go about exactly how we can get a production incentive for us to do a lot of different things on our farm. What about the bushels that we have in our bin right now? Can they get delivered in 2025?
I mean, if you want to hold them for that long, technically, yeah. I already sold mine.
Good right now.
No, I sold mine a couple months ago.
You probably sold it at $6.
No, not quite at that. But we knew it was going downhill. We got out. So, which was probably the right thing, hopefully. But I mean, you could technically hold until late. There's some pilot projects going on now. You might be able to make a couple pennies a bushel on some of the pilot projects today. But by and large, this will be on the 2024 crop. And step one, guys, is know what your data is worth, know what your number is, and just control who are you working with, where's your data going. It's the data that creates value.
So if you're a landlord and not owner-operator, who owns the data?
Yeah, so it's the data tied to the bushel. So it's whoever owns the bushel and owns the data. So this is going to influence, I think, a lot more sharecropping, a lot more flex leases, those kind of things.
You're going to get higher rent, Dave.
Yeah, higher rent, yeah.
That's what I love about it. This was the Inflation Reduction Act, remember?
Yeah.
I've got two things. I know Tanner's going to want to wrap this up because we all got a tight schedule, but it's about adoption of the ethanol plants. Are they on board with this? And then how do we make sure we get paid? How do we make sure it's just not a 20 cent
That's right.
deal?
So a lot of it, all the ethanol companies know about this. None of them have really publicly come out with their exact program yet, because we're still waiting on some of the guidelines, right? And again, we're going to get some of those guidelines tomorrow. So hopefully be able to get some of those companies coming out. I'm talking with tons of them, though, and they are saying, yes, we know we got to incentivize the farmer. And what I'm telling them is, hey, I think the farmer who is verified, they got to have the data, right? It's in the validity of the data is how you're going to command a better price. But if they properly incentivize farmers, more will participate, more will improve their scores and implement these practices, and there'll be enough money to avoid fraud.
You're
by
going to
having
get a
this
blue
verified.
check on your.
Well, here's where I'm saying, like
verified.
the big time operator next to me that's working on smaller margins and more acres. What if they go and negotiate and go, yeah, I'd take 25 extra cents, and where I need the 50 or whatever it is.
That's one of my big fears in this, right? So a lot of programs today are paying farmers 2 cents, 4 cents, 5 cents, saying, hey, give us all this data. They're not telling you what they're making on it. So as farmers, we need to create awareness. It's not a us versus them, but it's a, hey, if ethanol companies, if we properly incentivize farmers, like, we're doing a good job, and we'll rise to the occasion. We'll help you out, but we got to have our fair share. Let's do this together. But yeah, farmers, we got to make sure that we know what the value of it is. And yeah, a couple farmers selling it for next to nothing, it just ruins the whole thing.
Same
But
thing,
I think
except
farmers
for-
are going to talk, right? If certain companies share enough, farmers are going to know about that, and a precedent's going to be set.
It's already happening.
You
already
talked about ethanol plants starting with a different score. One might be so 50 is the basis, let's say,
Yeah.
and 60 is where one is. But then the ethanol plant down the road might be at a 42.
Yeah, they're rocking and
So
rolling.
are they going to give different bids? Are we
Yeah.
going to have a whole new app that has different bids? Like if I go to this ethanol plant, my carbon bid is over here, and if I go or my bonus on this, is every ethanol plant going to give a different bid out there
Yeah,
too?
so I think it'll be your bid, like your normal bid, and then they'll have an additional
Just
bid
additionality.
based on the CI score.
Okay, fair
so
enough.
they're going to say, hey, here's our price for the corn, and here's our percentage share based on the CI score, or how much we will pay based on your CI score from a delta of, call it that 29.
So it could go the
number or
other way.
whatever.
You could get more at a different. I mean, yeah, the farmer might sell it short, but then you might.
Yep.
Yeah.
Might be able to shop around a little bit.
We need an auction in the middle. True price discovery.
There you go.
I knew this was going to be a problem because I love talking with Mitchell. I've gotten the privilege to do it on more than just Farm for Profit, and you're such a wealth of knowledge. So before we wrap this up, how do people get access to that wealth of knowledge, you and your team?
Yeah, so we're doing our webinars and podcast stuff all the time. Our podcast is called the Topsoil Podcast. All of our webinars and stuff are on the Continuum Ag YouTube page. Our software is topsoil.ag. Our main website is continuum.ag. Social media at Continuum Ag. We got a lot of stuff out there.
You do, and that's
But-
what makes it a lot of fun for
Yeah.
us to help go on this journey alongside you, and hopefully have our listeners go along with you as well, because you as the producer are the only one that's going to know if this is right on your farm, and
Yeah.
you're the only one that's going to truly know if you're maximizing your potential.
The biggest thing is just be paying attention. You don't have to jump and do something right now, but just know these things are happening. Know that your data is super valuable, and you need to control it and work with people that you trust and get your fair share for that data.
One more question, Tanner, before we end. We're Farm for Profit Podcast, for those of you that are listening for the first time. And we've interviewed other carbon deals that I thought they were paying $25 an acre or something like that. Anything that can be profitable. I thought I heard you earlier. This could bring a couple hundred per acre?
Yeah, a couple $100.
So a couple hundred per acre. So
To the ethanol plant.
and then the
That's
farmer
what's
getting maybe
available.
50% of
maybe
that share.
50% of that.
Yeah, so on my score, right, was worth a maximum of $406 an acre. Again, we don't know the exact rules,
Okay.
but if it were to go today, it'd be about $406 an acre. So if I can get 50% of that as a farmer, $203 an acre. I mean,
200
guys,
yeah, this
complete
is-
game changer.
So this is way different than any carbon we've talked about before. At maybe $25 an acre
Yeah.
is kind of where we've been, I think.
We're
Now,
not,
my
we're not
score's
selling
super
carbon.
low.
Correct.
My
We're
score,
just talking carbon.
yeah.
Intensity scores.
That's right.
Yeah, we're not selling the carbon credit. Yeah.
We're selling the low carbon bushel. So that's where the value's different. The value's higher because it's these tax credits. The value's higher because it's here's the data with the bushel. Now it's
But
done. It's more
where I was
certain.
going with this, Tanner, is if I was going to make a change and I had to make additionality to get a carbon credit, if you will, there still is the juice worth the squeeze, right? Now I might be able to take their program and make the same change for cover crops or whatever, but now the juice might be worth the squeeze because it's just more money. I'm just talking finances, period.
It's a much juicier fruit.
Oh, much juicier.
And you can use like other cost share programs and stuff too, right? Other cost share programs that help on the practice change, and then this is based on your actual score. Like, man, it's a wild time. And again, that's what I'm just saying. Farmers, just pay attention. Like, there is more opportunity out there than what.
Wild, wild west.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, so these guys, I don't know what order these episodes are going to come out, but the last interview that we did, these guys have challenged me to give a 10-word summary.
Oh, yes.
Because they say I talk too much, but I can't believe that.
Usually I get some of that. I don't know. I didn't do that today, though.
So while I do my 10-word summary, I want you to be thinking about right now we've been asking all of our guests, how best do you learn something new? So if you want to go figure something out that's brand new, what has effectively allowed you to pick it up the fastest? So think about that answer. To me, are you going to count your work? You're counting the words?
Sure.
Carbon intensity scores is a tax credit.
You got
It's
like
hard
two
to
left.
count.
Look into it. No, into it's one word.
Maybe it should be 10 phrases.
With Continuum Ag.
There you go.
I like that.
There you go. So how do you pick up on something new the fastest?
For me, it's by talking with other people. So, I mean, I can read a little bit. I do some podcasting. But for the most part, it's going and talking with other people, being at events like this, very much face-to-face, hands-on.
That's a good answer.
That is.
I like it. You guys have to challenge them before we let Mitchell go.
Well, you kind of did that in your deal. Go to
That's
Continuum
true.
Ag.
Not only did I get efficient on my summary, I also wrapped in.
I would just say, keep an open mind. This is out of any carbon thing that we've heard, and we've tried to cover it quite a bit. Like, the incentive is there, and whether you believe in it or not, like, if you don't do this and your neighbor's doing it, how competitive are you going to be? That's tough.
Your challenge is to continue being profitable in agriculture with Continuum Ag.
There we go.
Just keep an open mind and check it out.
That's great. Mitchell, it's been a pleasure to have you again on the podcast. I look forward to, again, continuing to watch and follow your journey and then take in the resources that you put out so graciously for everybody to consume.
Thanks, fellas.
Thank you.
Always fun.
Yeah, listeners, until next time, have a good one.